Thor: Love and Thunder is another Taika Waititi Marvel fever dream, and I'm all for it. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watch Your Pass. Today I'm talking about Thor: Love and Thunder, which comes to theaters on July 8th, 2022. It is the next chapter in Marvel Phase 4. It is an insane chapter, it is a ridiculous chapter, but it is a ton of fun. If you liked Thor Ragnarok, then this will be right up your alley. My hot take is I definitely think you should watch it. Look, it's just a lot of fun. It's got a crazy art style, it's got a lot of energy, it's got some really fantastic music, and it is a fun story with some dramatic moments, and it also introduces a really interesting new villain in Gorr the God Butcher. It is just an entertaining fest of insanity that had me entertained the entire time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the film, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then go into the ending. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers in this review. If you don't want to know what happens, I will leave the spoilers to the ending section. So you can watch this review. I'll keep it vague. When I get to the ending section, turn it off, and I'll give a warning before I start talking about spoilers. So you can feel free to watch it now and then turn it off in, I don't know, 5-ish minutes. We'll find out. So in Thor: Love and Thunder, you have Thor, who is at a more contemplative part of his life. He seems to be trying to find himself. After all the things that he has seen over his years, he's become a little bit disconnected from humanity. He still wants to do good. He still wants to help people, but he tries not to get too close to anyone because of all the loss he has seen. I mean, look, you've been following the Marvel Cinematic Universe just like I have. It has been a rough few years for Thor, and I think at this point he is trying to just find some inner peace and trying to kind of stay disconnected from everyone. But the rise of a new enemy that threatens both him and everyone he knows and loves could maybe push him out of his slump, and as a result, maybe save the universe. We'll find out. So, things I liked about this movie. The first, it's just the ridiculousness. I mean, this, if you watch Ragnarok, Ragnarok had a really nice insanity to it, and Thor: Love and Thunder is no different. Like, there are just some amazing choices that are made that cause the movie story to just kind of go up to 11. There's the way they get around is amazing. The fight scenes are over the top. The story is insane at times, and some of the things that Thor and his group are asked to do to kind of save the universe are just a lot of fun and very, very crazy. Now, it's not pure ridiculousness. I mean, there are still, you know, some somewhat grounded scenes, some scenes with drama, but overall, when I think about this movie, there are some things that I think about that just are so over the top, I couldn't help but smile when I was watching it. And that kind of leads directly into the second point. The humor in this film is really, really good. There's a lot of very subtle humor. You know, it's a Marvel movie. There's always some humor, but this one seems to dial it up even more. There's some fun interactions between Thor and his weapon. There's some fun interactions between Thor and the rest of his crew. And there's some fun interactions between Thor and the people that he meets. And there are just so many really good laugh out loud moments. So many dry humor moments from Korg, who's voiced by Taika Waititi. So many just funny instances where something will happen that just comes out of left field. You're just going to be laughing a lot during this movie, which is nice because the fate of the world and the fate of the universe hangs in the balance, and you're still just kind of loving what's happening and enjoying the moment. So the third thing I really loved are the visuals, and this all fits in with the kind of like Thor Ragnarok over the top style. The visuals are bold and have some really bright colors, and it just feels like a very different type of movie than some of the other Marvel movies that have come out recently. It feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels like something that is kind of bright and exciting and enjoyable. And that's not to say the other Marvel movies are bad, but like Doctor Strange was a good movie. It just had a very different feel than Thor: Love and Thunder. And a lot of that is because of the bright, colorful style that you get in this movie. I mean, just look at the poster. Like, you have a wonderful 80s kind of neon style that fits perfectly with the story, and also is a nice kind of progression from Thor Ragnarok. And that goes right into the fourth thing I really love, the music. There's a lot of 80s music in this movie. It will kind of blare during some of the most exciting scenes, and it is, again, something that is just so much fun, and it just kind of lends a lot of energy and excitement to this movie, and it also contributes to the overall kind of over the top feel. Like, 80s music, 80s hairband music is something that you would expect in a movie that is kind of dialing up to 11, and it all kind of fits perfectly together. The style, the music, the visuals, the ridiculous, everything kind of blends together to form this very fun, very exciting entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All right, things I didn't love as much. The first, there are some, I don't know, I'll call them plot holes. Like, there are some things that are introduced in this movie that just caused kind of like strange questions about things that have happened in the past. And I'll go into that in the end. I'm not gonna talk about it right here. I only noticed a few. I'm sure there are a lot more. I was talking with some other friends after the movie, and they all had very different things to talk about. But look, like, don't worry too much about it. Just enjoy this movie as a whole, and you'll be fine. And the second thing I didn't really love, and I'm gonna put a spoiler tag here. I'm not gonna spoil it specifically, but I will put a spoiler tag here. So if you don't want to know anything about the film, if you want to go in just completely blind, I would stop watching right now. There is a certain lack of consequences in this movie, and I'm going to go into that in the ending and talk a little bit more about it. But there were some big moments that I thought, oh my gosh, like, this is big, this is huge, this is a big character that is going to die, and like, oh no, they're fine. And part of that might be just kind of the overall kind of irreverent nature of this movie. Part of that might be they don't want to kill off these big characters, but it did cause this movie to feel like there was a certain lack of consequence, despite the very real threat that was looming throughout the movie. So, going to the ending, and if you didn't already turn it off, this is where there will be spoilers. If you don't want to know what happens in the film, turn it off now. But the main villain in this movie is Gorr the God Butcher. He is this essentially nobody who was worshiping the sun god on a desert planet. He put all his faith into this sun god. He was like trying to take care of his daughter and him when everyone else in his like civilization had died. The movie opens with him like carrying his daughter, and she just becomes very weak because they don't have anything. It's a desert planet. There's no water, there's no food, and she ultimately dies. And it is a very sad scene. It's a very poignant opening to this movie. And then Gorr sees this like oasis up ahead, and he goes to this oasis, and inside he finds water, he finds food, he kind of drinks the water, gorges himself on fruit, and he looks up and he sees the sun god. Like, the god that he has been worshiping is there. After he notices that the sun god is there, he's like, why are you here? And the sun god says, we just killed the wielder of the necrosword before he could hurt anyone else. And you find out that the necrosword is this dark, shadowy sword that can actually kill gods. And so obviously it's a thing that the sun god would not want to have around. And Gorr is like so excited. He's like, oh, we never gave up faith. We are here for you. And this god is just kind of like, I don't care. Like, all you're supposed to do is like worship me and grovel me. I don't really care what happens to you. And this understandably upsets Gorr because he had just buried his daughter and was like waiting for a sign. And apparently that sign was never going to come. Maybe this was the sign. So Gorr ends up renouncing the sun god, and this angers the sun god. And so he picks him up and is, about to kill him. And then the necro sword kind of appears in Gorr's hand. It kind of rises from the shadows and appears in Gorr's hand, and Gorr kills the sun god. And thus Gorr the God Butcher is born, and he vows to kill all the uncaring, callous gods and kind of free people from their suffering. It is a strong goal. We will see if he makes it there. Now, on the flip side, you have Thor, who finds out about Gorr the God Butcher, who has been killing gods. He has to go to a planet where one of the gods was just killed, and it's kind of devolved into chaos. And while he's there, he meets Sif, who says, Asgard is next. Like, she is beaten up. She was trying to defend this world, but she failed. And she says, Asgard is next. Don't worry about me. He still brings her back to the Asgard, but he hurries to New Asgard. And when he's there, it's under attack. And you're like, okay, well, Thor's here. I guess everything will be okay. But you see Mjolnir just flying around left and right. And like, what is going on? And then you see a new Thor, a new Lady Thor, who is wielding this hammer and just kicking ass and taking names. And the hammer has developed some new powers. Like, remember you saw the hammer get crushed, and I think it was Ragnarok. And now the hammer is back together, but when she throws it, it can break apart into like a shotgun like setup that just scatters and takes out enemies and then reforms back together on the hammer. So hey, Mjolnir learned a new trick as well. And you're like, who is this person? And after the fight, we find out that this person is none other than Jane Foster. Jane Foster, the love of Thor's, I guess, eternity, is now wielding Mjolnir and is a Thor. And so, you know what? Everything seems great, but it probably isn't. So, why is Jane Foster now able to wield the hammer? Well, you find out that some more about their backstory. And when it seemed like maybe their relationship was on the rocks, Thor, spoke to Mjolnir and was like, take care of her always. And this, I guess, imbued Mjolnir with this like sense to protect Jane. And what you find out is that Jane has late stage cancer. She has stage 4 cancer. And while she's trying to look for a cure, nothing is working. But while she's researching, some Viking books appear on her desk. And they speak of like the strength that you can get from the hammer and kind of push her towards that hammer. So she ends up going to Asgard, to New Asgard, and approaching the hammer. And when she approached it, it like broke free, reformed. And when she picked it up, she got the power of Thor. She got the power of the hammer and is able to kind of be a superhero now. So you think everything is great, you think that maybe everything is cured, but you do find out that when she's not holding the hammer, Jane reverts back to kind of her current self. And in that state, she still has cancer. Like, it's still affecting her body. She's not cured. She can just kind of mask it when she picks up the hammer. So not cured, but at least she's able to kind of, I don't know, fight the fight. So at the end of this fight, when it looks like Thor and Jane Thor are going to be able to overcome the God Butcher, he rallies his shadow forces and ends up kidnapping all the children of Asgard, and then just like slips away into the shadows. So now they have extra incentive. Not only are they worried about the God Butcher killing gods, they're worried about him killing all their Asgardian children. And so they rally together to try to stop him. So eventually our heroes are worried about the God Butcher. They're worried about what's going to happen. And so they gather, they're going to go to Omnipotent City and talk to the gods and try to get all the gods to rally around them and fight the God Butcher. And so our crew gather. We've got Thor and Valkyrie and Korg. And they're the ones that are going to go and try to convince the gods to help out. And for this review, I will just call Jane Foster's Thor, maybe Jane Thor or Thor, Jane. Yeah, I'll just call her Jane Thor. That'll be easier to go with. So they gather, and this is where some of the ridiculousness of this movie really kind of shine. So earlier, when Thor had helped out a civilization, he had stopped them from being destroyed, but in the process, kind of destroyed everything about their civilization. They rewarded him with these giant screaming goats, and these goats are just a fun, ridiculous aspect of this movie. They are large, powerful, they scream, they're unpredictable. So Thor took them with him. Now in New Asgard, they need a ship. They need a ship to go to Omnipotent City. And so what they do is they take like one of the New Asgard cruising ships, take out all the touristy stuff. Thor straps the goats to the ship, puts Stormbreaker, his new hammer that he got in Endgame, at the helm. That hammer shoots out like a ray of rainbow light that creates this like rainbow bridge that the goats then run across to propel them through space and time. And the goats, scream when it's happening. It is a bright, exciting, crazy moment that, hey, you know what? Don't worry too much about it. Like, well, how can they breathe up there? Hey, they're Asgardians. I guess maybe they're fine. What about the cold? Who cares? Yeah, this ridiculous, fun, over-the-top mode of transportation that fits perfectly with the style, and also was, when I think about this movie, that's like the first thing that comes to mind is this like Viking ship riding a rainbow with screaming goats in the front. It is a great visual. They go to Omnipotent City. As you imagine, it doesn't really work out well. I'm going to kind of skip this. I don't want to do like a full play-by-play throughout this, but while they're there, they see Zeus, who was Thor's hero. Zeus is played by Russell Crowe in this movie, and he, Thor thinks like, okay, I will be able to rally everyone. Unfortunately for him, like the sun god, Zeus is not the most impressive person. He's uncarried. He seems a little silly. And so Thor eventually confronts him and says, like, look, we need to all rally to stop the God Butcher. And eventually he finds out that Zeus is scared. Like, Zeus is like, he has the Necrosword. Like, why would I fight him? And we are here safe in Omnipotent City, and he's not going to get here. So he also finds out during his conversation with Zeus that the God Butcher is trying to get to eternity. He's trying to get to this thing called the Altar of Eternity, which I think is in like the center of the universe. And the legend is that the first person who gets to the Altar of Eternity is able to make a wish. And so the God Butcher is going there. You can imagine what the wish would be. It would be to get rid of all the gods. And so Zeus is like, he's never going to get there. He's never going to breach the alternate eternity. He doesn't have the key. What's the key, you ask? Well, we find out later the key is Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker is the key to open up this realm. Zeus also says, you can't leave because you know where Omnipotent City is. You can't leave the God Butcher to us. So they have to stay. Thor obviously wants to go help. He wants to go fight. He wants to go save those kids. And so he ends up slaying Zeus and taking Zeus's lightning bolt and going off to help these kids. As you'd imagine, they leave this scene on their rainbow ship of craziness and go to confront the God Butcher where he is. And they are able to deduce that he is in the Shadow Realm, which for someone that has powers over Shadow, not really good for Thor, but hey, you know what? That's where they got to go. So they eventually make their way to the Shadow Realm. And when they're there, they confront the God Butcher. And it's clearly a trap. Everyone knew it was going to be a trap, but you know what? It's what they had to do. And so they fight it out with the God Butcher. And this is a really cool scene because the Shadow Realm like sucks away all the light. So everything is black and white except for something that's like kind of lit by power. Like, so the lightning bolt that the Valkyrie ends up using, when that's charged, it'll have a little bit of color around it. And same with like Stormbreaker, Thor's axe hammer. Like that will have a little bit of color around it too. So it has a really nice effect. And it's also a really cool fight scene because Thor ends up fighting the God Butcher. And so Thor's axe is like lighting up blue with like lightning power. And Gorr's sword is lighting up red. It has a very kind of Star Wars feel, like when they're fighting and you can't really see much color, but you see the like blue light of Thor's hammer and the red light of Gorr's sword. It's a really cool look. Eventually, though, Val ends up stabbing Gorr with the lightning bolt, but Gorr stabs her as well. Thor, worried about Val and worried about, her survival, tries to take everyone back to New Asgard with Stormbreaker. And when he does that, when he's about to leave, he opens the portal. They get sucked up, but that's when Gorr appears from the shadows, grabs Stormbreaker, and like breaks it out of Thor's grasp. And so Thor and everyone get transported back to New Asgard, and Stormbreaker stays there. So back in New Asgard, Val gets medical help. We find out that Jane is not doing that well without, like I said, when she doesn't have the hammer, she doesn't have the power. But we also find out that when she has the hammer, it takes kind of like all of her strength to wield the hammer. And so that means her body isn't fighting the cancer anymore. And so when that happens, like essentially it's accelerating her body's decline while giving her the strength to fight. So there, Thor basically says like, I don't want you to go. Like, I need to do this alone. I want you to stay. I want you to get better. Like, I don't want to live life without you. And Val agrees. Like, she's not in a great place. She wants to fight, but she agrees to stay. So now it's basically just Thor. Korg was hurt during the fight with Zeus. Val was hurt during the fight with Gorr. And Jane can't really do much because she's getting treatment for cancer. So Thor leaves to go save the kids. We find out that Gorr is at Eternity, and he's starting to use Stormbreaker to open the gates. There's also all the Asgardian children are here. They weren't at the fight in the Shadow Realm, but now they're here. They're, I guess, going to be hostages. Who knows why they're there? But during the opening of Eternity, the temple starts to become unstable. A rock falls. It looks like it's going to hit the kids. But wouldn't you know it, gets stopped right at the last minute. There's Thor holding the rock. And how did he get here? Well, he used Zeus's lightning bolt to kind of transport him up here. And so now he doesn't have Stormbreaker anymore. Stormbreaker is being used to open the gate, but he does have the lightning bolt and he has his Thor powers. He moves the rock away, frees the kids, and they're like, what are we going to do? And he tells them to go gather weapons. Like, and you're like, what? These kids are going to fight against like all these shadow monsters that are now being formed to try to stop Thor. But then Thor uses the lightning bolt to imbue them with the power of Thor. And so he uses this lightning bolt to imbue all the kids with temporary strength and temporary fighting prowess. So they all run and attack the shadow monsters. The kids are all holding their own, which is amazing because they have really no fighting training whatsoever. But apparently with this magical Thor power, they are able to now hold their own. And Thor goes to fight Gorr. And Thor and Gorr have a good fight. But you know what? Gorr is a really good fighter. And eventually, Gorr is about to stab Thor. And as he's about to do it, boom, Mjolnir just comes and like whacks him in the face and like saves Thor's life. And you're like, okay, that's weird. And then you see Jane Thor appear. And what I really loved about this scene is that when Thor sees her, like, she just saved his life. She probably just saved the universe. And he looks up at her and he's like, he mouths like no, because he knows what this means. He knows that this means that she is no longer getting her treatment and this might be her last fight. But she did save his life. And so together, both of them fight Gorr, and they form a really great fighting team. Like, they both attack Gorr and they end up kind of overwhelming him. But eventually Mjolnir is able to get a hit on the necro sword, the actual sword, and that looks to hurt it. It's not destroyed, but it is hurt, and it doesn't look great. So eventually Thor tells the kids to go back home. It looks like maybe this might be the end of the fight, but they keep fighting, and Thor is able to eventually get the necro sword to be kind of tangled up with the lightning bolt and holding it up. He's able to hold the necro sword up with the lightning bolt, kind of in a standstill. And Jane throws the hammer, throws Mjolnir. It goes and hits the necro sword, which was already damaged earlier, and shatters it. Which, as you can imagine, is not good for Gorr, because Gorr kind of derived his power from the necro sword. But the necro sword shattered, he's also kind of shattered. But the necro sword looks to kind of like start reforming. But thankfully, Jane kind of thought of this already. She throws Mjolnir, it breaks apart into all of its pieces, and then kind of surrounds the pieces of the necro sword and gathers them all up into Mjolnir. Like, okay, this is kind of cool. Maybe Mjolnir will have like some new necro sword powers. But Jane just takes this hammer that is now full of necro sword pieces and slams it on the ground, essentially just destroying it, pummeling the necro sword. And that is really what causes Gorr to lose all of his powers, and Gorr kind of reverts back to Gorr. But during kind of the destruction of the necro sword, Gorr is able to make it to eternity, because the gate was open already. The gate opened during this fight. Gorr is able to kind of make it to eternity. And eternity is this kind of strange altar that looks like it has the like a texture issue, because it basically has like the universe, like stars and stuff covering it. It looks kind of like if Galactus was meditating and then also had like a texture of the stars mapped over it. That's what it kind of looks like. And Gorr is able to get there and make his wish. And when he gets there, we are transported to eternity. So before we were fighting in this cavern, now Gorr is like standing in front of the altar in this like serene, peaceful kind of like water area. There's like a thin layer of water. They're all standing on it, and Gorr is about ready to make his wish. So Gorr is there, and then we have Thor and Jane there as well. Thor looks up at him and is like, essentially he knows that Gorr is already there to make his wish. And he says, I know your pain, but this is not the way. He says, it's not death or revenge you seek. And Gorr's like, what do I seek? And Thor says, you seek love. And Gorr's like, what love? Why should I seek love? And Thor's like, it's because it's all any of us want. And then he turns his back on Gorr and walks towards Jane. And Gorr's like, how dare you turn your back on me? And Thor's like, he says, you've won, Gorr. Why would I spend my last moments with you when I could be with her? I choose love. You can too. You can bring her back. Make your wish. So Gorr contemplates this, and he knows he doesn't have much more time. So he says, I'm dying, she'll be alone. And Thor says, she won't be alone. And then Gorr makes his wish. So next you see Gorr lying on the ground in eternity, and kneeling above him is his daughter. But the interesting thing is, in the reflection of the water, because there's a very thin layer of water over it, you see that the daughter's shadow or reflection has that like star kind of texture. So eternity seems to be kind of inhabiting, or at least powering, Gorr's daughter. So Gorr's daughter's back, but there's something about eternity in her. But she's still there, and Gorr finally looks happy because he has his daughter back. But he's gonna die, so maybe bittersweet for him. And Thor and Jane spend their last moments together. They embrace, and then they kiss, and Jane dies. So when she dies, she kind of like disintegrates into this like light dust that floats away on the wind, kind of like what happened when Odin died. And you're like, that's interesting. And then the movie switches to kind of like an epilogue narrated by Korg that has a statue of Jane, and it talks about her sacrifice and how she kind of sacrificed herself to save the world. The statue is in New Asgard. It's this beautiful kind of like marble statue of her. And you get to some updates on some of the people. You see that Valkyrie's still there. She's still running New Asgard, but she's training the kids to fight because they realize they kind of like they still need to fight, even though they're in this beautiful new place. And then you see Thor in his house with this young rambunctious kid, and they say that that this is the kid that turned Thor from sad god into dad god. So again, love the writing, love Taika Waititi's humor, and you see that Thor is taking care of uh, Gorr's child. But something is off about her, because then after he makes her breakfast, they get ready and they open the door and they are in the middle of a battle, and they run out to kind of embrace the battle. Thor is wielding Stormbreaker. I forget what the daughter is wielding, but over this, the narration says that these two are known by many names. Speaking of speaking to Thor and the daughter, but to those that know them, they're simply known as Love and Thunder. And boom, there you go. That's where the title comes from. You get it right at the very end, and they go into battle. And clearly, the daughter has some sort of eternity powers, because she starts shooting like lasers out of her eyes, which Gorr never could do. So there you go. That is Thor: Love and Thunder. There are two stinger scenes. The first stinger comes right at the start. You see Zeus lying on the ground, and he's awake, being tended by his, like, I guess, servants, the people that were around him when he was in omnipotency. He's still there, and he laments kind of the state that has happened, where people used to worship the gods and fear the gods and ask the gods for things, even though they weren't going to get them. And now all people revere are superheroes. So he kind of laments that. Then he says, "When did we become a joke? No more." Says, "They will fear us again when Thor, Odin's son, falls from the sky." So Zeus is basically vowing his revenge on Thor. And he says, "Do you understand that, my son?" And you look up, and there is Zeus's son, ready for battle. And it is Roy Kent. Well, not Roy Kent, but it's Brett Goldstein, ready for battle. So Roy Kent has now entered the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And now Stinger 2, we are in like this beautiful world, and that space dust, space light kind of flitters in and solidifies, and then you see Jane. She's kind of confused. She's not sure what happens. And then we see Heimdall, the old gatekeeper, who says, "I see you're dead now. Thank you for looking after my son," because she helped save his son, who was one of the kids that were kidnapped from New Asgard. And he says, "You are welcome to the land of the gods. Welcome to Valhalla." And so Jane, because she became a Thor, became a god, is now in Valhalla. So that is Thor: Love and Thunder. Like I said, it's just a lot of fun. It's a really enjoyable movie experience. I mean, some of the things that were weird about the plot, like some of the things that kind of felt like maybe plot holes that were introduced, like, for one, when Jane picks up the hammer, she becomes Thor. Now, when Captain America picked up the hammer in, I think it was Endgame, he was able to wield Mjolnir. He was able to kind of use it, but he didn't get the powers of Thor. Like, that would have been interesting if his armor changed, or if he changed, but no, he was just able to use the armor. Who knows why? Maybe he just chose not to. It's unexplained, but that's one thing. Also, Thor was able to give like powers to all the children temporarily, but still able to give them powers, which means, I don't know, maybe he could have used that during Endgame, during some of the fighting there, to help save people. Now, you could argue that maybe this special power is coming from him having Zeus's lightning bolt. Like, he used Zeus's lightning bolt to charge them up. But he does give them the power of Thor, is what he said. So he didn't say, like, "I'll give you the power of Zeus," or "I'll give you the power of lightning." He said, "I'll give you the power of Thor." So again, another minor thing, but it did feel a little strange. And I thought it was also weird that, Gorr could have made any wish. Like, he could have wished for anything. He could have wished to end all suffering. He could have wished to, like, go back to the time when him and his daughter were alive and, like, have her be safe. He could have wished to, like, I don't know, heal himself and his daughter. There's all sorts of wishes he could have made. He only wished to bring back his daughter, and that's like the one wish. There's no more chances to make a wish from eternity. It feels like, I don't know, maybe not the best wish he could have made. He could have ended all suffering in the universe. Like, that was his goal. He wanted to kill the gods to end people's suffering. He could have just ended that. So little things like that. And then the other thing that I kind of criticized about, like, going back to the lack of consequences, there are a lot of scenes in this movie where people, like, might die, right? You get Sif, who has her, like, arm cut off and she feels like she's gonna die. You've got Korg, who gets lightning bolted by Zeus and he crumbles and you feel like maybe he'll die. And you get Val stabbed by Gorr, thinking maybe she'll die. And then you get Zeus, who was, like, lightning bolted by Thor. All of them end up fine. So that's why the, like, lack of consequences. There are multiple scenes when you're like, oh my gosh, like, that's a big moment, and then they're like, oh no, we're fine. it felt like maybe there should be more gravity, especially because this movie is supposed to kind of have the end of the universe as a consequence, and yet no one gets hurt. At least no one that you care about. Like the only people that get hurt are like gods that they've never mentioned or people that they never mentioned. And then Jane does end up dying. But the fact that she's now in Valhalla, I bet she'll come back somehow. I bet in some future movie they're gonna have like some sort of siege on Valhalla, or they'll have to like gather the Valhalla dead gods to help fight something in Marvel. Like it'll probably happen. So that was also the lack of consequences comment. But look, this movie's just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I left with a giant smile on my face. I didn't really care too much about these minor issues because the movie is just so much fun and so entertaining. So that is Thor Love and Thunder. It's coming to theaters on July 8th, 2022. And thanks so much for watching. If you like this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.